You're listening to All About Girls of Color podcast, a space dedicated to creating environments that allow girls to thrive. We explore issues and solutions that focus on removing obstacles so the natural joy and genius of girls can bloom. Join us as we dive into conversations all about girls of color and the women they become.
I'm Tanisa Kunwright, the founder and executive director of Detour Empowers and the Fancy Teen Girls Leadership Academy.
I'm Gabriela Delgado, an educator and principal consultant for Saving Our Starfish.
And I'm Janedra Sykes, an equity, diversity, and inclusion certified organizational development coach and consultant and a partner in Arboreta Group.
Disclaimer. Our intention is to bring our whole selves to the conversations by bringing our professional and personal selves to each episode. Any views or opinions on the podcast are personal and belong solely to the creators and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the creators may or may not have been associated with in a professional or personal capacity unless explicitly stated.
All right, welcome to another episode of All About Girls of Color. We are so excited, and you're going to see that the format looks a little bit differently today, just a tiny bit different, but we are testing ourselves in our own comfort zone and our ability to remain flexible and to be divergent thinkers of trying to problem solve. So we'll leave out the details of the technology challenges we had, but nonetheless, we've got Jamie and Tia joining the call, who've been extremely patient. So we're super excited to dive in to a great conversation and dialogue amongst friends. So I'm going to hand it over to Janedra, who is sitting about 2 inches from me.
And I'll just kind of scrunch in.
And she's going to do our formal introduction and kick us off, since she's actually already connected with the two of you. So.
You know, and I'm sorry about the panic sweat. What can you say? All right.
We'll make it work.
We'll make it work. It's not scratch and sniff. It's a podcast. Okay, so I'm Janedra, one of the co-facilitators of All About Girls of Color, and this is our podcast. And I'm so excited to be here and to have you both here, because this is a topic that I've wanted to have a conversation about for a long time. But let me introduce Tanisa.
Yeah.
Right, because she's kind of... Then we'll get back to my question. Then I'll breathe deep.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Tanisa Kunwright, the founder and executive director of Detour Empowers and 1/3 of the All About Girls of Color Collective.
Cool.
Yeah.
And Gabby, did you introduce yourself?
I did not,
okay.
But I'm Gabby Delgado. I am with Saving Our Starfish, and it's good to be here with all of you.
And I am Janedra Sykes. I'm a partner in a consulting firm called Arboreta Group, and I'm the last third of the co-facilitators for All About Girls of Color. And I just like for you to just take a couple of moments for each of you to introduce yourself, where you are, and how you know us. And then we could start the conversation about AllySHip between white women and women of color. Okay, Jamie, you want to start us out?
Sure, I'd love to. I'm Jamie Hampton. I'm the founder and principal of Mixed Communications. I'm calling in from Oregon, though I met this crew of people while living in San Diego, and that's where Mixed is located. Our focus at Mixed is utilizing our communication skills for social justice, essentially. Which has been, so we're 10 years old. That has been my introduction to work with communities of color. And in that 10 years, I have grown tremendously in my knowledge of what it means to be an ally and how to be a better ally. And I'm also very excited for this conversation. So thank you for inviting me to be a part of it.
Cool.
And I'm Tia Anzelloti, here in San Diego, though in a different locale than the rest of the team. And also really looking forward to the conversation. I had the opportunity to get to know All About Girls of Color through our project through Lead San Diego, through the chamber. And so our team worked to help support an initiative that you all were trying to map out. And I just really was impressed with the dedication, the passion that you all have for supporting girls of color, and like Jamie, kind of have been on a journey to figure out how to be the best ally possible, and just really was glad to be able to continue that journey by being part of the group and continue to kind of support the work and learn from you as you go. So looking forward to our conversation.
Cool. So am I. For a living, I do equity, diversity, and inclusion work. So I kind of work with those issues that surround that a lot. And I've honestly, over my lifetime, I'm really struggled with the concept of allyship. I know from its inception, it kind of started with, stepping back from the kind of the white savior role, like, I can help you people, let me save you, to standing on the sidelines and offering support initially. But I think it's kind of morphed into something that, I'm not sure how helpful it is. When I'm quiet, I tend to like the words comrade, co-conspirator, because to me, it kind of brings in that everybody has skin in this game of pushing for a more socially just world, that everybody will benefit, even white folks, though they might not know it and kind of resist it. So when I suggested to the group this topic, I immediately thought of both of you, because my experience with you is that you see us and you are in support of us and you're doing your own work. Like there's a profound difference than being surveilled and then being seen. And I've experienced you as supportive. And in our individual conversations prior to this call, there's two white feminists that I follow, Anna Marie Cox and Rebecca Traister, and they describe white liberal feminism as lady of the manor, right? That attitude, like, this is my house, I'm benevolent, all this. And I just thought that was so perfect, because I feel that vibe around other white women. I'm in the process of editing my relationships with a lot of folks. And I don't feel it with the both of you. And my question to you is, why? Like, what has your journey been like where you've kind of worked this issue that society really has socialized you to hold,
That's a big question.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
I love big questions.
When I was in my first management job, I didn't have any experience, and the people that I was interviewing with asked me, how did I know that I was going to be a good manager? And at the time, I coached women's rugby, and I could only talk about like what it meant to be a coach. But this was a long time ago, 20 years ago. But I really had to sit with that to ask myself, like, why do I know that I'm going to be a good manager? And this question that you're posing, Ginedra, I knew that you were going to ask it because you told me you were going to ask it in our pre-interview. And I still don't totally know. And I think I have to figure that out, because if I can answer that question directly, then I can specifically offer that as feedback to other white women on how to follow suit. But my initial, and Tia, I'm so curious what you would add to this. My initial take is that listening is action, and I really start by listening. I have realized that as a white woman, my privilege to walk into a room and talk is pretty great. Not as great as white men, but there's a lot of things that I don't have to think about. And so I'm just super aware of stepping back from that access and that ease and listening first. And the second thing that goes greatly with that is I try to build awareness, which is listening, but then I take that and I hustle behind the scenes to be like, well, what did Ginedra say to me in that conversation? What is Tanisa's organization really trying to do with these young folks? And I spend a lot of time researching behind the scenes so that when I come back, I can be a little bit more informed. And those two things are just constant, so that I can be a better person. And I also don't use the word ally. I'm not very good in the kind of like PC kind of terms. I love co-conspirator. And also very early in Mixte's work, we work with Kevin Malone at the San Diego Organizing Project, organizing faith leaders to lift up communities of color. And I hope this is okay, but he'd always say, let's walk in and fuck shit up. I say that all the time. Let's walk in and fuck shit up because that shit ain't right. Do that. Yeah. Tia, what would you add?
Yeah, very similar kind of thought process, Jamie. I was trying to, after I got the prompt that this is what we're going to talk about, I also started kind of thinking and processing and trying to kind of piece things together. And, I was trying to figure out how I did kind of get here. And I was, I think, even as a kid, my mom had a very, like everyone's experience is to be equally respected, right? Whether it's the clerk at the store or the mail person or whoever it is, like everyone deserves respect for their life and their story. And so I think somewhere in my persona that's embedded in that, like every person deserves that kind of equal respect. But I really think that I started thinking about my privilege and my bias really not until I was in college, right? Like I'm from New England, pretty small town, not a whole lot of diversity happening there. And then when I got to college, I started taking classes where people were asking those kinds of questions, and I always kind of had as a kid, maybe I wasn't saying it was fucked up, but like, that's not right. Like, why is that like that? And I always kind of had that question. So when I got to college and was in a space where people were similarly thinking, like, why is it like that? And that's really not okay. And what's my role in trying to address that? I think that's really when I started kind of being more conscious about it. And really, to your point, like lifelong learner of how to be that co-conspirator, and listening for sure, but then trying to figure out how to take what I heard and kind of translate it into dialogue and conversation and kind of changing the way I act and I approach things. And especially with our kids, trying to help them like have those conversations that I never had as a kid, right? And kind of try to have that dialogue and make them understand it's okay to ask those kind of questions. Like, even when my daughter's asking, like, why can't girls at our school do this? The boys can. I'm like, yeah, that's messed up, right? Like, how do we get at that? So really thinking about just kind of holistically addressing it, not only around race, but gender and other things like that.
Yeah.
And just being really, like I said, conscious. And like, for example, I was thinking about it like a few years ago, like I ran a stop sign. And the cop on the motorcycle, who I had no idea was even there, followed me into the Vons parking lot after I ran the stop sign. And I hadn't been, one, white woman, I hadn't been pulled over in a long time. And two, I got nervous and was like, what do I do? Do I get out of the car? He like parked behind me. And I did start to open the door and get out. And then I was like, no, I think I'm just supposed to stay in the car and roll down the window. And I was talking to my husband after, and I was like, so there was no reaction to me opening the door and starting to get out as a white woman. But if I had been a person of color, especially a man of color, like that scene would have gone down way differently, right? So just really trying to be cognizant of things in my life that happen that I can think about and then have conversations about to continue to kind of explore that, and my role in that personally. And then professionally, like when I was in college, I had the opportunity to work in DC on the Hill. Like I was like, I'm going to go into politics. That's where we make change. That's how things happen. And then I was like, no. This is not where it's at, right? The positive thing that came out of that was a small group of interns got to spend a few sessions with Congressman John Lewis, right? So, and his constant refrain to us was about getting into good trouble. And that's just really stuck with me. And like, that's kind of the PC way of Kevin Malone's, right? Way of saying things like, you need to shake things up and make trouble. And so whether it's little things like having those conversations around like when I got pulled over and why things didn't go the way they did, or looking at systems and figuring out how as a professional or how I can support the, All About Girls of Color collaborative and making those changes systemically. feel compelled like to do that, I think. And so just really glad to be able to be part of the dialogue.
Cool.
Well, when you all were sharing, part of me was thinking, it just seems like you don't have the same fear about interacting with women of color the way maybe others do. Because sometimes I feel like a lot of those actions we see from folks, it's based out of fear because they just don't know, or they might think, well, we're a particular threat to them. And so when you were talking, and Jamie, you started by saying, well, I don't really know. I thought, no, you're a cool white lady, and you're cool for a variety of ways. And so are you, Tia. And so I think that's what we were trying to get. So how do we encourage other people to tap into that? And so I'm curious, we are oftentimes very aware when we're the only one of color in a certain space. And I know, Tia, you've been a real advocate and supporter of our All About Girls of Color collective meetings that we hold quarterly in the community. So I'm going to pose this question just out of curiosity and wanting to learn more from the two of you. What's it like when you're in spaces and it's all just women of color? Do you feel like you belong there? Do you feel like you have to do any code switching the way maybe we kind of have had to do in our careers? I'm just curious, what is that like for you when the tables are turned?
That's a good question.
Thanks. I'm curious.
Yeah.
Because we always talk about, being the only person of color, but I wonder, well, what's it like when you're the only white person in that space and we're talking about issues that impact us? I'm just wondering, what is that like for you?
Tia, do you want to go or do you want me to?
Go ahead. If you're ready, I want to think a little bit and listen to you. So go for it.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, that doesn't happen very often. Right. Yeah. Even in the work that we do, my business partner, Kareem, and I, who's also my life partner, we were having this conversation because we're wanting to support an organization that wants to disrupt philanthropy and the racism that's built into historic philanthropy, right? So philanthropy's money it often can go to help communities of color, but in small portions does that money actually go to organizations led by people of color doing work in their own communities. Mm-hmm. And so we were having this conversation and Kareem and I were like, well, our clients, all but one, are nonprofits doing change maker kind of work. We just audited how many are led by people of color versus not. And I'm sad to say that the majority of our clients are not led by people of color. So even in the work that we're doing, it is a rare occasion when that happens. So when it does, I feel pure enthusiasm and joy for being a part of those moments. It's a reminder to me that Black women or women of color are absolutely amazing and they're doing really amazing work. And it's my job to sit back and take it in and really to be a part of it by letting the people in the room around me lead. I don't know better. I'm not letting them lead. They are leading. My job is just to be there and soak it up, I think. But it's sadly, it's rare.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think that's right on, Jamie. I was trying to think of examples too, and again, few and far between. I think for me, it's like a learning opportunity is how I look at it, right? Like I'm not in that situation that often. So I need to take advantage of that to learn from great leaders and kind of how they lead to figure out the best role for me to play in that kind of a scenario. It's the example I'm thinking of is I had the opportunity to work with a group of women promotoras in the City Heights neighborhood. And I think there was a perception of this is the role that they're going to play from our white leadership of our organization. And my role was to kind of facilitate that. And then as we started doing it, I thought, these women are being pigeonholed into this corner because of what other people think they are capable of. And there's so much more that they can do if we let them lead this rather than telling them what we need them to do, right? And so that was a really great learning opportunity for me to kind of approach those situations differently, and kind of go on with a different lens than I did just because of the organization that I was coming into it from. So I think that's really stuck with me. And the few other times that I've been in that scenario, I've tried to kind of go in from that angle, like a learning angle, versus to your point around philanthropy, like this is what we need to do to fix things, and here's your little role, and this is what we need you to do, kind of angle.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that you said that, Jamie, because I'm one of the few, people of color that is currently leading an organization, and I really just appreciate how you've collaborated with us on the All About Girls of Color collective for the work that Mixed Tea is doing. And that's to me an example of like boots on the ground, an actual, corporation helping out, the philanthropic world and the nonprofits that are in spaces where they may not have resources that are sufficient enough to access certain services. So can you speak about those types of things that you are doing to empower nonprofits that are run by people of color? And also, if you're able to influence your colleagues or peers that may be in the same role and have the same capability to do as you're doing, but may not be doing that at this time. Because often, DEI, ever since, the whole couple of movements, and I won't mention any names that have happened within the last couple of years. Now everyone has a DEI unit or a person but we rarely see even still the work that comes from it and the long-term work versus just the the day or the celebration are the things that really aren't going to mean anything after the event is held. And so, in my opinion, you're doing that. And so, could you just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you for that. I feel like you just teed up my life focus right now. Right now being like for a long time. I think what's important to answer that question is to just very, very briefly tell you what my path has been as a fairly ignorant, uninformed person, 10 to, let's say like 6 to 10 years ago. So what you are recognizing is the tip of a really big iceberg. And my work here is just very recent, sadly. And also I figured it out and I'm working on it. So thankfully for that. But when I started Mixty 10 years ago, we were working in primarily communities of color and mostly bilingual communities. Multiple years into running business, I had 8 staff and they all looked just like me. Cisgender, we had 1 male, the rest were women. None of them had any connection to the communities that we're working in. And what a blight on me and Mixty, right? I had the trust of our clients, and also I was a horrible employer. Why was I allowing that to happen, right? I wasn't married to Kareem at the time, but he was my partner, and we had gone out on a date, and we were in a restaurant in Point Loma, and these couples were praying right before they ate dinner. And he, as a Palestinian Lebanese immigrant, was like, man, how privileged of them to be able to do this and to not ever worry about what the reaction of the people around them would be. And I engaged on a fight with him that is one of the worst moments in my life. I took all my privilege and channeled that into a conversation of trying to look at it from all of the different ways to excuse that our society was built for that moment, right? And I'm thankful that Kareem didn't give up on me. I at that point, I mean, he called some friends and was like, either I'm going to break up with him or like, yeah, like he's out. Like I don't have time for you, right? And I'm not your burden to like you're not my burden. I don't have to fix this. He basically was like, look. I asked my friends, these are the books you need to read. Either you do this or like we don't have a future. And we're talking like white privilege books, how to fight racism as a white person, like pretty basic foundational books. That was my bedside reading for a good 6 months before I could even come out of it enough to like be like, oh my God, that is me. Like I'm looking at that every day and I'm the only person making that happen. So I started making changes at MIXD. We changed our job descriptions. We changed how we were recruiting. We changed the amount of time that we allowed for recruiting so that we could find leaders in the Black community, the LGBTQ community, the immigrant community, to get our job descriptions out through these different avenues. Fast forward today, I mean, this is like 6 to 7 years later. I'm a minority on my team. I'm a minority on our management team. We are celebrated for our diversity, and not just because you can check the box, but our staff reports inclusion and being valued and like all of the right things at EDI. So in that journey, I was like, cool, okay, I kind of fixed me. I kind of see how I can keep fixing me, but the PR industry is 88% white. What the fuck? Right? And that's my industry. So this is actually how Ginedra and I most closely bonded, I think, in this last couple of years. So I took that and was like, I can't allow this to happen. MIXD won PR Agency of the Year on the year that our local chapter celebrated its 60th anniversary. I went to that dinner and they had a slideshow going of all of the PR practitioners of the year, 60 of them, all white men, all old white men, until it got to the last like 2, and then there were some women, and then it went back to an old white man. I got my acceptance speech after that. And I walked up on that stage and was like, oh no, no, this is not going to happen here. And I lectured my people, right? Pay your interns. If you want to create a career pathway, don't make it for the privileged few who can work for free. Pay your interns. If you don't know people of color, find a way to go have lunch with them, invite them here, make them a part of the community, right? I lectured. And then right after that, I joined the board with the pure focus of changing the nature of our industry. So I went to the system, right? Mm-hmm. Our association is creating the problem. Lots more that we can talk about that there. We've had a lot of success, and Ginedra has been a huge part of it.
I'm going to be the keynote at the awards thing next month. They asked me to, and I don't know what I'm going to say. I might lose it up there. Because I had a year at a PR agency that I called the salt mine year, right? It was just horrible. I don't know what I'm going to say.
Say that, Ginedra. I mean, say that. They need to hear it. We need to hear it. I mean, I'm part of it. Right. So the last piece of that puzzle is I wanted to be the action in place, right? So there's one where I advocate, I like to say that my audience is other white people, other white women. That is who I can connect with and who I have ultimate power to influence. And also I like to create, I like to show that business can be a force for good. So we created a paid jobs training program, right? Which is what you're talking about, Tanisa, that we want to partner with organizations that have folks who are underrepresented in this career and create paid pathways and use our reputation to place them into ideally full-time jobs and new careers. But I think the summary of all of that is once you see it, you just can't unsee it. And if you have a heart, you have to do something. I wish more companies would follow suit.
So Tia, can you speak a little bit about the good trouble that you may get into with other white women? Because that's what I really want to know. Like, what do they talk about with each other? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, Jamie makes really good points about kind of people don't know what they don't know or don't realize. Like, you know what I mean? Like if they haven't seen it, like they don't get it, right? So, I mean, even like right now I'm in the recruiting space, right? And I was talking to 2 other white women who have been in the space way longer than I have, doing recruiting, executive level recruiting for nonprofits, public sector. And we're talking about posting our position announcements and posting the salary range, right? And so they're like, oh, that just makes our job so much easier because you don't have to dance around it and you can talk about it right up front. And I was, well, it's also an equity issue too, right? And they were like, what? Like, it didn't even like occur. And I was like, so let me lay it out for you. So if you're a white male and you ask me what the range is, and I tell you it's 150 to 175, and then you're a woman of color and you ask me the same question, I tell you it's 100 to 115. There's no way for you to know that there was a disparity there because it's not published anywhere publicly. And they were like, oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense. So it's amazing to me sometimes the lack of exposure to conversations like that some folks have. So, they
don't need to know. Right?
Yeah, you don't have to, right? Exactly. Yeah. And they don't choose to put themselves in places where they're going to have to be challenged and have those conversations, right? So, the recruiting space is fine and I really like it, but I am definitely like looking for places to have conversations like this, because that is not happening all the time. We're in the spaces that I am, and it's conversations like the one I just articulated that are happening. I was like, this is like way down here. I want to be like digging much deeper into this issue and kind of getting past these kind of initial pieces, but those are important too, right? So, okay, fine. We will start here and we'll go from here, but it's just really, and I think for me personally too, outside of that workspace, I often choose to put myself with other white women who have a similar mindset, right? Like, so then we can have that conversation. And it's only when, often through things that our kids do, right? They're on this sports team, and then you're kind of forced into relationships with other white folks usually. And then as you start to listen, for me, it's like, okay, I'm like pacing out, like, where are we at in this conversation? And when and where is it okay for me to kind of push a little bit? Like, how long do I have to know you before we can have a little bit more of a conversation around race and race equity and your role as a woman of color versus my role as a white woman and things like that. And so I struggle with that, like when and where to kind of be the one to be disruptive. Like I'm so proud of you, Jamie, for like jumping up and like taking advantage of that moment at the podium, because I struggle with sometimes like sitting at a softball game and someone says something and I'm like, is now the right time? Like, do I make a comment? Like, I don't know this person that well and other people are listening. Like sometimes it's challenging for me to figure out when and where and how to have those kind of conversations. So that's something that I'm still trying to kind of figure out, because I don't know. I don't know why. I should be able to do what Jamie did and just get in there and be like, what? Like, we need to talk more about this, or do you hear what you're saying and how that might
and I don't think you're alone in that, Tia. I've got friends who said, like, I don't want to offend and I don't want to alienate a person. And then, if we do have to see them again at the next softball game, like, what's that going to be like? And you don't know if this is the space, but you brought up kids, and I know you have a daughter. So I'd love to hear from you. What are some things that you ponder as a mom and what she is being exposed to or not being exposed to? And what does that look like on a day-to-day basis in your interactions? If you don't mind me asking that.
Yeah, no, I don't at all. And I have one of each, right? So we have a male and a female, and how we navigate that is different, right? Because like the societal expectations are so different, right? But I think, with my daughter, it's more trying to keep the space open for those kinds of dialogues. And I think the example, they were doing a exercise in one of her classes, and the teacher made some kind of comment around like boys being loud and girls being quiet. And my daughter was like, so I didn't say it out loud, but we had to they were doing some kind of thing where you put your answer on the computer and then it pops up to the teacher and they see. So she's like, but in the computer I put, well, the loudest person I know is my friend Jenna, and she's the girl. And the quietest kid I know is this guy, Liam. He never talks. And I was like, okay, so that's good that you put that out there in the computer, like, why didn't you feel like you could say that in the group, right, in the classroom? And it was a similar kind of conversation. Well, I didn't want, Liam's in the class. I didn't want him to feel bad, like it was negative that he's quiet. He's just quiet, and that's okay. But like the teacher framed it like that was a negative for him to be quiet. So I didn't want him to feel bad by me saying that, because it's fine that he's quiet. He's really nice. The other boys that are really loud are really obnoxious. Like, I don't like them, So it's just really trying to kind of find spaces to have that conversation and like explore those things with her. And with my son, the opposite, right? Like, he is not a super aggressive, competitive kid, but I feel like sometimes he feels like he's supposed to be, right? And so having that same kind of conversation around like, it's okay that you aren't, playing flag football super aggressively. Like, I get that the coach isn't playing you because you're not, but that's okay. Like, that's the coach's problem, not your problem, that he expects you to be a certain way as a boy. And so, just trying to create spaces for those conversations and name things when I see them, and or ask questions when I see them, to give them the space to kind of bring it up and talk it through. But it's an ongoing, even with my husband, I remember when the kids were little, Anna was like painting her nails and AJ was like, oh, I want it too. And I was like, cool. And then my husband came home and he's like, what's up with the purple nail polish on our son, and I was like, well, he wanted it. And I could see him like struggling with it because of how he was raised, but he was like, ultimately he was like, okay. Like, and I think it was more like, I'm afraid when I take him to the store, it's going to be harder for him. Like, he's going to be judged. And I was like, well, that's just something we're going to have to support him through if that's how he wants to present himself in the world. And so again, it's like that constant trying to be thoughtful, trying to be cognizant and conscious of opportunities to learn and have those conversations.
I love that, because, sometimes we want to drop little seeds of knowledge. And I appreciate you sharing that it's not necessarily something you're fully comfortable with. And I can't say that I would be as outspoken as some of my friends or colleagues in certain spaces. And so I just want to acknowledge that. And I think it's hard for parents. I'm not a parent, but I can imagine that it would just be very difficult to sometimes just say, how do I do right by my kid so that cycles aren't repeated down the road? And so I think you're planting those seeds with your kids.
Yeah. And we've erred on that. Our kids have erred on that side. Like, they were in school, like, young, maybe second grade, and I'm just starting to learn about the history of this country and slavery and enslavement. And, there's a kid of color in my son's class, and he said to him, like, well, if we were alive then, like, you would have been my slave. And for him, it wasn't like that's just, I'm white, you're not. And so, that kid went home to his parents and like, they called us and instead of being like, oh, my kid would never say that, I was like, okay, well, let's have a conversation with these two families and kind of start helping these kids have this conversation that they need to be having. And so, I think it presents itself. And so to find the opportunities to have that conversation and help them understand the why behind things is just, I try to be really cognizant about that. Sorry.
And that speaks to a good point that happened with your son, because that's what we don't talk about, the power dynamic. Like what's at play? He was recognizing a power dynamic that was like taught at that moment. And I think about myself and my relationship with my white peers, how, if I'm quiet or if I clap back, really depends on that power differential. What's at play? Like, I used to have a mentor. When I was working in white spaces, and I would call her at the end of the day, and I would say, I think I blew myself out of there. And she would be like, Janedra, what did you say? You know what I mean? That constant measuring of, Can I say this to her because we're peers? This is my supervisor. I mean, that constant negotiation that I think we all do to different degrees to kind of think about, is this the time to push it, right? Could I deal with the consequences of having that conversation right now? Because sometimes you can't. You got a mortgage, you got...
Can't lose your job on certain days.
Yeah, certain days you need that job.
I love this conversation right now because this exact thing is something that I'm working on personally for me to be a better person at MXD. We've got a new person on our leadership team. She's been around for 9 months, and she's a person of color. I'm her direct manager. I like to say mentor because I don't like the word manager, but I'm her person, and I'm also the founder. And so we're talking with her about, you're here to speak up. Like, you are super vocal. You've got strong opinions about what's happening in your communities and the work that we're doing. Use your voice. And this conversation has come up in two ways in my understanding of how I need to alter what we're doing at MXD to actually make it a safe space for all people to speak up. I am so thankful that she thought about it for a week and came back to our next meeting. And she was like, hey, I just want to talk about that. I'm working on it. Here's what I'm doing. Also, it's really easy for you to say that to me as a white woman who's never really had to think about the consequences for speaking up. She's a mom. She's a sole income earner per family, right? Like, there's a lot of things that she has to worry about. Also, you're in charge. So how easy for you? Yeah. So I've been sitting with that for the last couple of weeks to try to understand, like, how does that show up in the spaces where I'm leading, and how can I get out of the way so that those power dynamics aren't influencing it. And at the same time, the other principal is a male. So when he talks about showing up at a room, he's got male privilege. Now, granted, person of color and an immigrant, so there's a lot of other things that he may be considering in those moments, but he can walk into a room differently. And Tia, I was thinking about you and that conversation with your daughter about who's loud and who's not. What I see that translate to 20 to 30 years later in the office environment is that women, when they come to work, are still afraid to speak up because we are just trained our entire lives that men speak up and they can do that, and we're meant to be quiet and pretty. And even though you're surrounded by really strong women who are confident, I think that is always the thing, subconsciously or not, whether we're aware of it or we're just not yet aware of it, that really gets in the way of women speaking up, and it's harder for women of color.
Yeah, absolutely. You took me back to a couple experiences that I had at work where, when I first experienced it, I thought that I was maybe not seeing what I thought I was seeing, and it was, I had proposed, we were working on developing an agenda for a conference that was focusing on issues impacting students. And so I said, I think it's really important to have a workshop focused on the fact that the students with the highest absentee rate or chronic absenteeism are also students who identify as LGBTQ. Now, this was probably maybe about 8-9 years ago. And when I made that comment, the supervisor at the time, white male, says, oh, no, I don't think that's one we need to add to the agenda. And I thought, okay, but I know the research, but I didn't say it at the time. I just was almost second guessing myself, like, oh, maybe I'm really like off base here, but everything I've read on this big California Healthy Kids Survey, which is something that's disseminated once a year, when I look at the data, that's what I'm reading, but I didn't say it at the time. And I sat with it and I thought, would it have been different if someone else in the room had proposed that? And so I didn't let it go, but I never addressed the supervisor. What I actually did is I went to another male colleague and I said, I want you to go and recommend that this be a topic. And sure enough, when he did, it was, oh, yeah.
Brilliant.
And then I thought, am I on candid camera? I mean, I really thought this doesn't happen. And then when I would have it happen again and again, I thought, no, this shit is real.
Yeah.
And it's not me. I'm not going crazy. And so it took me a while to kind of sit with it. And then even with other colleagues to say, no, we need to debrief because what you're seeing is actually happening and it's not you. Because for a while I kind of thought, well, maybe this is me, or if I was the youngest one in the room, maybe that's why I wasn't being taken seriously, or maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. And then I realized I know what the fuck I'm talking about. Yeah. And the fact that you're not looking at that data and ignoring those students tells me that you don't know, and you really shouldn't be in a place of leadership, but yet you are. And so that's something that really hits home for me, because oftentimes I feel like all these missed opportunities that where people's voices were silenced, women, whether they were women of color or white women, that as women, because of our gender, are oftentimes quieted because of a particular thought or idea we may have. And you do need to rely on other people or your own voice to speak up and change that. So it's just something that I wanted to share, because when you said that, I actually got like a feeling of like, oh, I still remember that moment. I still remember the conference room, and I still remember feeling like I didn't have a voice. Mm-hmm. And of course, this was a long time ago, and now I know better. And I know myself now, and I know if I was in that same room, I probably wouldn't be liked with how I would respond. But I also don't care. Yeah. I feel like at this point, I would know how to say it gently, but I'm also going to push back to say you're wrong. And that just takes, I think, for any younger women listening to know that that's a journey and a process that takes time to learn and to master. And it's not easy. And we have to call on our friends to say, you got to pull me off that ledge right now, because I'm about to lose it. And we have to just do that for ourselves.
And we could do that for each other in the meeting, right? In real time, right. You know, and say, wait a minute, she just said that.
But if you're there, if she's not the only one, which probably she is, right? So like, yeah.
I agree. I think also, and we're kind of sort of talking about this a little bit, but can you guys speak to sponsorship versus mentorship? Because another thing that happens with, young people and young professionals and women who are trying to find their voice, they're looking for, or they're approached from people that want to like mentor, right? But that can only go so far. Sometimes we do need people to be in spaces that we don't have access to, or who can voice, certain feedback that we're unable to voice. And it requires a sponsorship, a person that's going to kind of pull you along and help you make that progress, versus just someone telling you what to do after the fact. So if you guys can kind of speak to that and where that shows up, if it shows up, how it shows up in your line of work at all.
I think I'm learning from you right now. I don't know that I really considered the difference between sponsorship and mentorship. So I think what I can do is reflect when I hear you describe that, what I think it looks like at MXD, which is so all of these dynamics that we're talking about, we're constantly working with our staff to develop the skills to be able to confront them in the moment. So whether that is, and this has happened, clients not respecting our team because they're young, they're people of color, they're women, whatever the reason, like that bias that shows up. So how do we confront that in the moment? But also, how do we have conversations with our clients when they're not doing well on the equity front, right? And so how do you hold them accountable? Even though we come in at communications, we don't do communications for communication's sake. We do it because we're trying to change outcomes in communities. So we have to hold our clients to that. So I think the way the sponsorship comes up, and I love this concept, and this is one of those things that I'm going to go read about afterward to make sure I understand it, is we actually have a system called 6 Steps to a Courageous Conversation. How do you walk into any room with a person and confront them about something that makes you uncomfortable, or that, it's just a big issue and you want to navigate it well? So kind of like the 3-part process, I'm going to show you how, then I'm going to watch you do it, and then you're going to do it on your own, and we'll debrief afterwards. And we provide them these steps so they literally can prepare for the conversation, but then we let them go have it. And maybe it doesn't go well, but man, the ability to learn and to reflect afterwards, I think is really big for our team. So I don't know, Denisa, if that is like baby steps in sponsorship.
Right. And then so I would say if it's a person that you have access to, for instance, one of your clients, right, and your staff member needs to have this courageous conversation, potentially you being there,
Yes,
having it, right? That's like more
yes,
of the sponsorship is like, yes, they're going to do it on their own, but how can you, have a little bit of your hand in it to make sure that it goes in their direction, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
they can be ready and say, all right, I got the 6-step down, I'm going in there. And then after they do it, they may get a response that they don't know how to come back from, right? But if you're there and you're able to be that kind of bumper to also look at the client and say, so now what?
yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Then it
yeah.
makes the person feel even more so supported because I've done my part and I've learned the 6 steps. But there is a part that, again, I may not have access to because I'm not the person in charge, right? So the person in charge is there to support me in that. And just allowing me to then feel comfortable enough to do what you said and then have reinforcements just in case the response that I get is not what I was going for. Because then that may take a whole nother 6 steps, right?
Yeah.
I have no idea, what the next 6 steps look like.
Usually cracking open a bottle of wine.
And then you too would do that afterwards, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, that one's out of the way, on to the next.
Yeah.
But, facilitating the process, because I find that often, people will tell you what to do all the time. But then it's like, okay, now I know how to ask for $1 million, but who has $1 million to even give me? You know what I mean? And it's like, all right, I've made a call to this person and that person. I've told them about you. They're expecting your call. Like just one step further to kind of facilitate, the connection or the crucial conversation or the X, whatever it is.
Or even watching you do it. I think about, I've been in offices where bosses have just, you want to come along? And I'm like, let's see how you're going to work this, right? Just to watch them do kind of like an apprenticeship. Almost.
Right, like a ride along.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very important because, me growing up, as a young person working through college, I ran my own bookkeeping business, and it allowed me access to entrepreneurs that were running these small businesses. And most of them didn't have a large staff. They were service-based businesses, right? So like pressure washing, rain gutters, things of that nature. But it allowed me to see how to run a business because I was working in such close proximity with them. So I do think that it's great because if you are, working your way up to becoming the person in charge, like what does being in charge truly look like other than a job description?
It's almost like the mentor idea on steroids.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
To say, I think we talked about this recently. Girls may go to a workshop or a one-day tour of a beautiful biotech company, and you think that's wonderful. But the sponsorship would kick in when that biotech company does more than just the one and done. Or it's what does it look like in your hiring practices? Like you said earlier, Jamie, what does it look like to provide some true certification because they participate in this apprenticeship program that was designed with them in mind. So taking that idea that, because mentorship is great, but it still sometimes leaves, there's room for growth on that end. And so perhaps, it sounds like you're doing a lot of that already with MXD. And so we would encourage our viewers and our listeners to push those boundaries. So what could it look like if you could reimagine those processes that you have in your own organizations, in the different networks that you're a part of, what could it look like if it was just done a little bit differently? So perhaps that's some food for thought for our...
And I also think in real teeny tiny ways that could be helpful too. That as white women, when another white woman watches you in real time handle a tricky situation like that, that's kind of telling them, well, she didn't die, right?
Yeah, come for her.
Yeah, they didn't come for her. She's okay. It's not in, because I think, when I think of myself, that some of those conversations I just build up in my head to the size of the Gettysburg Address, when there really can be simple, but there's a difference between simple and easy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes a simple, hey, that's not cool, versus like the 30-minute lecture on, racial equality. But large and small ways.
When I started my role in the PRSA, the Public Relations Society of America board, before we got you in there, Ginedra, a year before, my job, I think, was to always ask the question, okay, cool, great idea. And how are we widening our network to include BIPOC communities, LGBTQ, disabled practitioners, whatever it may. I was a broken record. Honestly, I feel like you could see the other board members roll their eyes. Okay, Jamie unmuted herself again. Here we go. Constantly asking, right? Constantly just asking. But behind the scenes, because on Zoom you can private message people, every single time there were 4 to 5 other white individuals in that room who would thank me to say, thank you. I wanted to say that. I don't know how. Thank you. I'm learning by watching. So to your point, Ginedra, and Tia, this is something you said earlier, just like I'm still trying to figure out when and how to speak up. So those small things, just being a broken record, really do provide a great example for other people. And I also was getting that feedback from the few folks of color in the room who, at this point, we were co-conspirating, right? To Jamie leading to make it safe so that they can lift up. And those practitioners are now in line to be the president and the president-elect of the organization. Like the long-term ripple effect of me asking simple questions wasn't easy. It was simple, Ginedra.
Yeah.
Okay, and how are we going to widen our network? Oh my God, for an entire year. But it got there, right? Nothing to do with sponsorship so much, but just
related, right?
Yeah,
you're flexing that privilege muscle that you have, and then that's all that we ask, right? Is like, just how do you continue to be open and practice humility? And I feel like both of you in our conversations, even coming into it, the fact that you agreed already told me, well, they're already cool ladies because they're jumping in and if you had reservations, I didn't pick up on that at all.
Yeah, they had reservations. I talked to them on the phone. Both of them were like, "Why me? I don't understand. Well, I don't know what to say."
And see, clearly you did know what to say. So, I feel like we could continue our conversation, and perhaps at some point, I know, Jamie, you're in Oregon, Tia, you're in San Diego. At some point, maybe we could all be together in a studio and bypass all of the tech issues that we encountered. But you know what? Look at us. We persevered. Yeah. We found another way and we made it work. And thank goodness, right? Because we had a wonderful, enriching dialogue with the two of you. So on behalf of the All About Girls of Color podcast, I'm Gabby.
I'm Ginedra.
I'm Tanisa.
Thanks for watching.
This podcast is made possible by the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. Additional sponsors include San Diego County Employees Charitable Organization. You can access all episodes and connect with us via email at allaboutgirlsofcolor.com.